Today, we have the pleasure of hosting two amazing speakers who will show us how to design systems that can be improved with design thinking. So we have Archie MS, a design leader with experience at Capgemini and GE Transportation, who is also passionate about diverse communities and events. And then we also have Justina Kuprach, who is a senior product designer at Capgemini, specializing in user-centered design and also is a certified yoga teacher. Please welcome Archie and Justina.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think we're good. Had a moment of confusion.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think, that's time. So let me share my screen. And yeah, just let me. Do you see my screen? Do you see the presentation? Or you see me?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you see presentation? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, it's always the risk. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for this very nice intro. I think first we should mention about our third speaker that unfortunately could not join today. Our plan was to join three of us. There is also Alicia. And with Alicia, we have small collective in our company where we are presenting, showing the importance of design thinking and how to implement it in the corporate environment. We are authors of our special program, Design Thinking, where we are training, showing, sometimes consulting on other project from perspective of design thinking. And Alicia is extremely talented designer. She also has a computer science background, and she's working heavily with the design systems. I am a product designer working mostly for a financial sector. Recently, I think I can call myself like full stack UX designer because I'm also a researcher. And yeah, happy to show you our topic. And Archie, if you can tell us a few words about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Archie. I've had some varied experience across the globe in different companies and have found my way in London. Both of us, as Justina mentioned, both of us work together in a very IT-heavy company, and we've made it our mission over the last few years to enable or empower individuals with our way of thinking, and by virtue of that, be able to even share a little bit of what we do with them. So we're here again to talk a little bit about supercharging design systems with systems and design thinking. That is an absolute mouthful. And we kept saying that there should be a drinking game where we drink to every time the word systems is used. So I'm going to put a challenge out there to the individuals listening on the call or even who are a part of this, but I would absolutely love to know how many times we use the word systems today in our session. And I don't know if there's going to be a challenge winner, but I think we're going to find out how much we talk about it. So let's go ahead and begin.
Yeah, if anyone wants to start drinking game, that's also okay. Friday afternoon.
Yes, that's appreciated.
Yeah.
Tuesday, Friday.
Yeah. So yeah. So jumping straight to our topic, supercharging design system with systems and design thinking. So I think most of us saw this graph in our career even more than a few times. However, I would like to start with a short intro to what is design thinking. So in our environment, we are using this graph double diamond when we have discover, define, develop, and deliver phase. And in discover phase, we are, of course, understanding the context. With define, we are defining the right problem. In develop phase, we are, of course, trying to create some potential solutions. And with the deliver, we are prototyping, testing, and analyzing. We are showing you this graph at the very beginning of the presentation because at the end of the presentation, we want to show you a similar solution, however, a bit different, because we want to involve our ideas through this, this presentation. But before we will go there, I would like to show you more about tell you more about the basics of and ideas of our presentation. So Don Norman recently, maybe not that recently, he mentioned that he spent all his life focusing on the user-centered design. However, now he would like to go even further. He see that we should not focus that much on the user. We need to start thinking about the collective. So he see everything as a system, and when it is very important to find the root causes inside each of problem. He mentioned that we should went out from this user-centered design. We start to focus on the systems, and I will mention about this a bit in few slides. So I really like this philosophy because for me, like Laura at the very beginning mentioned me as a yoga teacher, I feel like it is very connected with my philosophy, that everything is connected and everything is a kind of system and have elements inside the system have influence on each other. So I really agree with this way of thinking personally. What is system thinking? So system thinking is the approach to solving a problem. However, it considers the overall system as a connection with the individual part. I think here you can have in mind something about the atomic design. I think that will be the good way to show. So when we create the design system based on the atomic design, you know, we will have small elements and like bigger ones, bigger organisms, and they all have influence on each other. And even the smaller atoms will influence like the biggest part. So that's the system thinking. It is seeing holistically all the interaction between inside the system. And in our presentation, we will be using human-centered system thinking. This name is connection. We are using it to show system. Sorry, we are using this name to because we wanted to find a name to connect design thinking and the system thinking together. At the very beginning, we were using DTST, but it was very difficult for us to use it so many times. So for this presentation, we will be using human-centered system thinking when we want to talk about the connection between design thinking and the system thinking. And what are the differences between design thinking and system thinking? So I think with design thinking, we know almost everything about this. So in design thinking, we will focus on the user. However, in the system thinking, we will focus on the system. We want to understand the dynamic inside the system, and we want to understand what is happening between the elements. In design thinking, we want to know what is happening between the user and our, for example, our solution. From in design thinking, we are focusing on our perspective is kind of narrow. However, in system thinking, it will be wider. So we want to see the all interaction inside the system. In design system, we will be driving by empathy. However, in system thinking, we will be more analytical. We will use different tools. We will use different programs to analyze also future-proof, for example, what can happen in the system. So in design thinking, we are also building up, and in the system thinking, we are breaking down. So I think we can see that there is like many differences here. However, there is also many similarities. For example, here as a design thinking and system thinking is part of the principle of humanity-centered design. And what is humanity-centered design is name created by Don Norman, who decided that we should not be longer user-centered, we should be humanity-centered. We should be thinking about the sustainability, we should think about the systems, we should think about the political systems. So it should be going away from the user, we should focus on the collective and the good of the collective. And that's very, very interesting because Don Norman spent all his life thinking about the user-centered design. And he mentioned that with age, probably he wants to change something and do something good for the collective. So I would recommend to read maybe more materials from Don Norman, who is mentioning about this new approach and system thinking. So for the good of the collective. And in this approach, where we have design thinking and system thinking, they are both empathized on the problem solving. So we want to solve some problems and also see beyond the surface. Why we should use both? Because at the same time, we can focus on our user needs. However, we will not forget about the environmental impact. We will not forget about that something is a element of the broader system. And maybe what if we don't use them together? The good example here are electric vehicles, where the plan for the electric vehicles was that they will be sustainable, they will be perfect, and they will solve many users' problems and user needs. However, there was maybe not enough system thinking when it came to the implementation of the electric vehicles, because currently we have some problem with the batteries, that they are generating many waste. Also, there is a anxiety about how far I can go with my electric vehicles. People are stressed because sometimes they are just stopping and there is no chargers around. There is also a problem with the resource extraction. Lithium and cobalt and nickel, there's like ethical labor problems here, and also environmental impact. So at the very end, if we don't think about the systems where electric, and we will not think about the system, and we will not think about the environment, and we will not think about what could happen in the future, it could end like with the electric vehicles, that they seemed to be perfect, however, they are not that perfect right now. And what can happen if we use the system thinking and design thinking together? The very good example is Johns Hopkins Hospital, when they decided to relocate the hospital. And at the same time, they said, okay, so we have a chance, we want to relocate. So maybe let's use this opportunity to change something. So they involve system thinking into this relocation. They ask about feedback. They thought about what problems users have. They ask about the communication, and they created the environment when the ownership is shared. And that came as a huge, meaningful change. And now the hospital is a role model for other hospitals that want to improve their system. Ending on this, Archie, I think you would like to tell us more about system thinking and design thinking.
Definitely will.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I find this quote a great way to explain what systems thinking is. It's not just looking at a single tree, but looking at the forest that the tree resides in. And it is a true art form. Systems thinking is a true art form, but it's something that can be learned. I lost your screen, my dear.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Give me a second. I'm so sorry. Should be fine now.
I see the screen, but I don't see the presentation.
Okay.
I don't know if you can stop sharing at the moment, then
Yeah.
open the file again and try to reshare.
Okay.
Ensure the file is open first, then you share.
Yeah. Sorry. Always happen when you care too much.
You're just going to be fine.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you see it?
Yes, my dear.
Amazing. Sorry once again.
Could we full screen it? Oh, I lost the words.
I would not risk it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. All right. So essentially, when we stopped here last, it is just to say that system thinking is something that can be learned. Let's move to the next slide. As essentially the way we see it is a mindset that is a combination of both design thinking and systems thinking. You're going to start seeing some of the ways in which we can adopt a little bit of both. And what does that exactly mean, right? You've learned about what systems thinking is and design thinking, but how do we build this within ourselves? To start off with, a very singular trait of UX design is empathy for the user. It's something that we've been taught day in and day out, and it's something that we continue to learn and evolve over the course of creating products. But moving into the next piece of it is embracing ambiguity and complexity. There is something slightly different here. We talk about ambiguity and not knowing and having understanding the problems fully, but there's also a complexity associated with the fact that the problem is part of a bigger whole. As a result, embracing both sides of this problem is important and can allow us to adopt a little bit of that holistic perspective, which is being able to see the problem as an interconnected, as a part of an interconnected whole. Now, to understand this interconnected nature of a system and the problem itself is the ability to understand and see the system dynamics, the patterns of behavior between the different parts of the system or different elements of the system, and understanding that it's not just a singular line that creates this relationship, but a loop. As Justina mentioned earlier, it is constantly energy given, energy received. And in that same vein of thought, this is systems thinking allows you to think about relationships in the form of a loop. Let's go to the next. All right. Now, another trait of design thinking here is iterating to find the right solution. But what does that really mean when it comes to addressing systems? We start off by iterating to solve the problem of the user, but now how do we consider the right fit within the system? How does it impact the larger system? We talk about radical collaboration, and collaboration is also another trait of design thinking itself. But in this sense, we're calling it radical collaboration. We have the usual suspects where we always collaborate with development, with product owners, immediate stakeholders in the pursuit of product creation. At this moment, with systems thinking, we start to invite including the office manager, the educational trainer, the marketing enthusiast, and multiple different other people into product development and understanding the interconnected aspect of our team itself. Why not bring legal? They're always a stonewall in all of our products. And then we move into understanding that system dynamics. Now, we talked about the loop of relationships. But how does that loop evolve over the course of time, over the course of multiple affectations of the environment that we're in? Now, that is something we need to monitor. So a system is not a static being, essentially. It is an evolving being, similar to archetypes and personas that we have created that we create for our users. It's something that's continuously evolving. Through radical collaboration, you can also start to understand how stakeholders are interconnected, the different processes in which we work and to build anything. Now, the end of all of this, it's to say any solution that we create has impact to both user, stakeholders, and the system, and the larger system. We need to, by mapping the system early on, we can anticipate some of those ripple effects ahead of schedule. So by the time we get to product out in the market, we have already thought through 5-10 steps ahead. This combined mindset basically leverages empathy to user and holistic thinking to address some of the more complex problems. Let's put in the concept of SDG, or the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are complex problems that are not focused on just an individual problem, but it's a part of a massive issue. By doing so, we can start to think of innovative, user-centered, and sustainable solutions that can last us quite a while. And from a corporate environment, this is something that we always are sorely looking for, because we're looking to sustain these solutions for longer periods of time. All right, let's move to the next page.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Archie. So I will shortly talk about how we can how our human-centered system thinking can help us with the designing of design system. So first of all, it will have to help us manage complexity, and at the same time create the user-centric solution. However, I would like to focus here a bit longer on the future proofing, because that's something that in our world like now, when everything changes so fast, is very important. So future proofing in general means that how to be prepared for future changes in the technology, changes in the accessibility rules, changes in the VR and of course AI, what can happen. And first of all, I think with the future proofing, very important is this modular design, where we can still have some control over over changes in the small atoms, and at the same time we are flexible. So our design system that we create with the modular design will be flexible, and it will be easier to adapt it to the changes. For example, with something will change in the accessibility. Also this holistic perspective. So while designing the design system, check the business, what business is planning. I think it is quite difficult, because usually sometimes business just decide about something during like week or two. However, involving the business stakeholders at the very beginning of creation of the design system, check the plans, check the possibilities, what can happen in the future, I think will save us some. We can think already about the components maybe that we will need in our design system. For example, for me, good example was where I met with the business and I heard about that we would like to count the hours of CPD learning done by financial advisors. And I knew from very beginning that we will be I need to have in mind that probably one of the components will need to be adjusted. So this future proofing is very important also with the thinking what can happen regarding the technology. I am working with the corporate environment, so I don't think that I will be very surprised that some new technology will come to me and I will need to work in a different, because it of course it takes some time. However, what can happen, what we can predict, I think we can predict a lot at the very beginning of creating a design system, especially if we talk with the people, and that will save us some time and nerves while developing. What are the common problems in design system? I think we all met in our career design system that they were not that perfect. So first of all, disjoint libraries. So I think that's something that we should focus at the very beginning, think about the old system and spend some more time working on the basics of the design system. Lack of the documentation, and that's something that I personally believe that all UX designers should spend some time even first week of work, reading only documentation about the design system, and that will save us time in the future, where we don't need to go back each time and check the specifications, and also create the mindset and create already some structure in our design that to use proper components. Inflexibility, I mentioned about this in the future proofing. So we need to still give some flexibility to our design system. Designing them, we should still give some place for adaptation, especially regional adaptation and cultural adaptation. I will be mentioning about this in our examples. So we still need to think that where our design system will be used based on the culture and based on the region. Limited customization, I think it is something that that is connected with inflexibility and how much we can customize our design system. I think it's something that we should really discuss and rethink, because we still need to keep our design system in a good shape. However, the level of customization, I think it's something that we need to decide. So keep it in this consistent, but at the same customize. Cross-functional adoption is something that often is happening. So design system looks different on the different devices, and neglecting the user feedback, but I think that's nothing good comes from neglecting the user feedback, so I will not tell more about this. We know all what will happen when we are not listening to our users. And here I prepared also a few examples about the design system that they were working together with system thinking and design thinking. So, for example, IBM is, of course, researching with the users, but at the same time, as a huge design system, they predict how the components will be reused across all the IBM products, and it is not easy to create that such a cross-functional base of the component. They were also very much focusing on the collaboration between devs, business, and other stakeholders. Airbnb had some problem with the regional adaptation at the very beginning. However, they solved it with creating the cross-platform consistency. So, however, they are still adapting a bit design system to the regions and the cultural perspective. That's why they are so successful with regarding the inclusive adaptation. For the Encore Spotify design system, here there were very big focus on the multimedia. However, at the same time on the accessibility. And it is very hard to keep good accessibility when we are focusing mostly on the multimedia. So they decide that they created a bit more flexible design system, a bit different on mobile and a bit different on the web, but at the same time focusing also on the part of the heavy users, and by heavy users I mean artists on the Spotify. So here they focus more about on the flexibility of the design system. Salesforce, I think it is similar to IBM, where huge design system is scalable and customized. You can customize it until some levels. However, at the same time, we are keeping some brand alignment here. Base, I think Base as a Uber design system. Here they were focusing on the regional adaptation and the customization, the same as Airbnb. You can use Uber everywhere. However, it will look a bit different based on the culture and the place where you are using it. Fluent. At the very beginning, there was a big problem with the Fluent design system. there was not good base of the components, there was not good base of the documentation. I was personally trying to use it on Sketch. That was a nightmare. However, after some time, they decide that they will be working on the better documentation, and I think now the documentation is better, and they know they improve the design system based on the user feedback. And Shopify, also good example where there is diverse business users, but at the same time they are keeping the flexibility. So, and brand consistency. So all those design systems really, they are focusing on this future proofing, on the flexibility, aligning to the market, aligning to the other system, and not create like super strict design system structure. And now we will talk about our human-centered system thinking.
So we all know the very famous design thinking framework, Double Diamond Framework. Justina mentioned it earlier. It's something that we commonly use as well. And it's also how we developed a systems approach to developing design systems. Now, first off, we are making an assumption that we already use design thinking to create design systems. It is something that we currently do. So how might we introduce systems thinking into this? Our first approach was looking at the Design Council in the UK. They published a framework where they talked about the first diamond focused heavily on thinking like a system. And the second diamond focused on acting like an entrepreneur, which means essentially to develop the system and deliver it. But this is where we started to think about going back to the mindset of being able to do both. Thinking like a human and a system plays a very relevant role in developing or in crafting this framework. And this is where we've reframed that idea and working through our own, which is thinking like a human and a system in the first diamond and acting like an entrepreneur in the second. Now let's move to the next slide. Okay. We're going to actually focus on the different phases as we move forward, and we're going to talk through how we can start to implement systems thinking into this as a whole to create your design system. Now, first and foremost, with Discover, the goal of Discover is to identify your stakeholders, be it internal and external, and understand exactly what their needs, wants, and pain points are. This can be done by conducting heuristic evaluations with your end users. It can also be done in one-on-one interviews, so on and so forth, whatever tool you use to work with your end users to best understand their requirements. The next piece of that is internal side, is looking at workshopping with your internal stakeholders, bringing back the idea of radical collaboration, including the legal team, the marketing team, the different teams that might not directly be involved in the creation of design systems and understand their requirements. All this does essentially is it gives you a palette off of which you can map the entire, or enough information to map the system. You can map it with the actors, which is your different stakeholders, as well as how they use the product, the design system itself, right? Their different behaviors in relation to the design system. And this could be as simple as mapping out internal processes. You can focus specifically on that. You can also focus on including the user and their behaviors with the design system on here as well. Now, the system can be mapped in diagram format, multiple different ways. It's just to understand the relationships between the different actors, the behaviors, and how they use the system, the loop that we talked about. Just understanding a little bit more about the loop itself, right? Let's move on to the next piece. All right, moving into thinking like moving into the define phase. This is where you get to understand and document who your user is. And again, just to reiterate, this could look like a persona. This could look like an archetype. There are also crazier ways now where people are experimenting with AI personas that are constantly uh, evolving alongside your product as well, simply by inputting all the research that's been done or any data that's been collected from analytics or any other ways into the system for it to create these AI evolving personas, archetypes, or anything. So you can use some of the existing tools to help you build some of the to understand your user. Okay, that was just a little bit of a sidetrack, but the next piece of that is understanding the problem. This could be a reframe. This could be developing a deeper understanding of the problem. This could be all of those things. The way you can do that is by focusing on this map that you have created before, assessing that map. What are the highs and lows of this system, right? What are some of the influences? And influences could be feasibility, tech feasibility, scalability, accessibility, everybility we can think of, consistency, patterns, access to stakeholders, governance. I mean, this could also be as simple as understanding what exactly your foundational elements of your design system are. They're different for different products. They're not all the same. You might require a search feature in one, you might not in the other. So it doesn't have to be huge and all-encompassing the way IBM is. But at the same time, if it is, what does that foundation level components or frameworks or other things are? Like, what are they? This could be assessing your design system itself, which is a map in itself. Now, apart from identifying all of this, and this is the final piece of define essentially. If you haven't already done this, but creating an evolving set of guiding principles. This could be something you already have. This could be something you're going to be creating new. But I don't want to just say you're going to create it and have this roster of information and move ahead. But these are principles that need to have some of the influences that affect your system itself, that affect the problem. We need to talk about guiding principles in relation to governance, in relation to consistency, available access to stakeholders, education, marketing, so many different things. These guiding principles need to start including some of that. Another great example could be a prioritization matrix that actually accommodates your immediate or future requirements. If you include that in your guiding principle, it's almost a process of working, a way of working, but it allows you to follow along in how it affects, it allows you to keep the design system more scalable and relevant consistently by including this already in your guiding principle. Let's move to the next piece. All right. Now we're moving into the meaty bit of it, right? Which is the most exciting part. I talked to you about identifying some of the foundational elements, but what if you can start to brainstorm solutions that aren't of the standard state of play? They could be unique, specific to your product. So these could look like specific patterns that are commonly used by yours. And an example that I can bring in was as a part of, while working at GE, we were heavy in creating tabular columns. And we would create these tables that told a story of how the car was moving from a car or a carriage within a train was moving from one end to the other. So these tables needed to be beefy, but they were foundational for what we were creating. And the information is so incredibly complex. Its representation needed to be simple, especially for people who are coming in new to this environment and haven't seen these before. So we needed to create recognizable elements and components within the table, which is how do you push elements or push specific, what is it called? Man, I forgot the word. It was off the top of my head.
System.
Yes. Oh, let's throw another system in there. Essentially to say if someone needed to I guess sift through or sieve through the table, how would they search for information? Our search wasn't becoming just a simple open field question mark, but it needed to be more of a filter. So we started to develop a heavy filter that wasn't just five pieces of filtering, but more so where we had to go into levels of details and expand until we got to the right filter criteria. So filters could be 15 levels in, which means they wanted to have the ability to even save that filter. How do you do that? So this is where you start to think about what exactly is unique to your system. We created these components and these frameworks of just the filtering element, the searching element, the table itself, and how we are using the table. Everything and the way they work together was all a pattern that we started to build around, and these were foundational elements for our product/products. So this is where you start to think about how can you be more creative in what types of patterns, components, tokens, and other things that you need for your design system. And all of this can be done, again, with the same set of stakeholders that you had initially started workshopping requirements with. You can start to include them in these spaces where you can get feedback early in the process, bringing back that concept of radical collaboration. The other aspect of this is any idea that you have come out with, any ideas, it doesn't just have to solve for the individual or function independently. It also needs to function as a part of a larger whole. So how are those dynamics playing with each other is an important consideration here as well. And lastly, bringing back that guiding principle of governance, right? Let's assume that we've already included in, how are we managing this evolution? How are we managing the versioning of even these ideas that we're vetting and moving past? Let's move to the last. All right. And finally, we're in deliver, right? This is where we start off by validating any update or even the design system that you've created. And this could be done either through tests, but also to keep an eye out for how changing one singular component can affect the system itself. What has changed? Then we need to consider rollout as an important factor of design system. Again, documentation is a huge problem within this space, and to ensure proper documentation is something we need to add into our, essential influences. If it is something that is a factor, then we need to ensure it's part of our principles as well, right? And it goes back to how are we educating our stakeholders? How are we providing them access to the system? Who requires access? What kind of access? What kind of information do they need? How are we marketing and advocating the system to ensure there's a wider adoption? What are the governance models? Is there a governor, is what I'm going to call it, to manage any version control, any updates, even consistency, right? And lastly, and most importantly, there is a new concept of research that's come out that's around continuous feedback and continuous discovery, which essentially means you're continuously speaking to customers in cycles to understand their requirements and how their requirements are evolving. This could be the same that could be considered as a part of this is how are we incorporating regular feedback? Maybe these are monthly calls with stakeholders or quarterly calls with different clients or customers, depending on who your clients are. The outcome of all of this is essentially a living, breathing, adaptable design system that grows as the product is growing, but also is being future-proofed for 5 to 10 years down the line by adding that element of systems thinking into it. Let's move to the last. I keep saying last slide. Should say next slide. Now, we've spoken a lot. It's been an hour of great conversation here. In short, we've talked a lot about what exactly is systems thinking. How can design systems benefit from a human-centered systems thinking approach? How can you think and develop this mindset of thinking like a human and a system simultaneously as you go through the process? And what are some best practices that you can incorporate today in developing design systems? And with that, I'm going to say next slide, and thank you all for paying attention. The missing individual is the first person up there, Ala. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it, and her hard work is always going to be remembered. I'm going to open up for a Q&A, but out of curiosity, what are some metrics you think are good to evaluate the impact of systems thinking on design systems?
I think I would use, I was thinking about this. And I would go with the similar metrics that we use to show the efficiency of the design system. So I would go with for example, measuring time from design to handover. I would check how many times component was used, for example, downloading the design system, if that's public, how many users are downloading the design system. But I think the most efficient would be this measurement from design to handover. And of course, from the perspective of the design system, I would check I would measure how happy designers and developers are with using the design system. So I would go with those metrics. And I wanted to ask you about something that we need to ask. And what do you think about AI and what will happen in the future of our human-centered system thinking?
Okay. Honestly, AI is something that's very, very relevant in today's time, but it's also creating, it's requiring components that are a lot more complex, dynamic, and interconnected in a way. And all of this is based on user behavior as well as the context in which it's used. So there's a lot of fluctuations which needs to be accommodated. As a result, this is something that systems thinking could heavily help and assist in developing design systems to accommodate some of those evolving dynamic pieces. So I think it's going to be more and more relevant, and Don Norman's on the right track. We're going to get there. But I have a final question to the participants, actually. How many times did we end up using the word systems in our conversation today? Did anyone count? Did anyone have a number to give us? I think that's going to be our measure of success.
500, I think.
500, yes. 500 shots. It's probably just going to be water for us. No other way. But we're opening the floor to any questions. any comments, violent reactions, all welcomed.